A heavy silence took over the courtroom. You couldn't hear a single breath, not even the scratch of a pen. Judge Robin Tarnowski had just played a recording that no one expected, least of all, music mogul Sean "Diddy" Combs. As his own voice echoed from the speakers, the color drained from his face. The content of that tape? So unsettling, a few jurors physically pulled back in shock. If you're new here, don't forget to like and subscribe. We bring you trusted, in-depth updates on the most talked-about trials. Now, back to the courtroom. This moment wasn't supposed to happen today. Everyone thought they were in for a routine back and forth over what evidence could be used. Legal teams were presenting arguments, eyes were on them, until the judge spoke up. "I've reviewed this in chambers," she said, "and the jury needs to hear it." Gasps filled the room. The court reporter even stopped typing. No warning, no heads up, just the judge instructing the tech to queue up Exhibit 24B. From that moment, everything changed. Until now, Diddy had been composed, confident even, as he faced serious charges. But the second that recording was mentioned, maybe it was the shock of knowing it existed, or maybe it was the realization that this could unravel everything his defense team had worked for. Whatever it was, the persona dropped. He wasn't a star anymore. He was a man on trial, about to hear his own voice challenge everything he'd denied. And when the audio played, it was more than incriminating. It was personal. It was raw. It was a confession, unfiltered, direct, and devastating. No lawyer could spin it. Earlier that morning, the courtroom buzzed like usual. Reporters whispered. Lawyers prepped quietly. Then Judge Tarnowski walked in, stone-faced, and immediately called both legal teams to the bench. The room went still. Some thought maybe it was a minor issue. But the way both sides responded, faces tense, heads nodding seriously, it was clear. This was something major. She returned to her seat, avoided looking at anyone, and announced, "After careful review, I've ruled that Exhibit 24B is admissible." The defense objected instantly, arguing about consent and editing, but the judge cut them off. "This audio has been reviewed by 3 independent experts. It is authentic and unaltered. The jury will hear it." And just like that, the tone of the trial shifted completely. The court tech prepped the system. Reporters leaned in. Diddy's relatives in the gallery looked worried. Prosecutors sat, frozen, unreadable. Diddy leaned toward his attorney, who gently placed a hand on his arm and shook his head. It was clear. There was no stopping what was coming. Judge Tarnowski turned to the jury and said, "You're about to hear a recording made on September 3rd, 2019, at a private home in Los Angeles. The voice you'll hear is the defendant, Sean Combs. Please listen carefully and consider it alongside all other testimony presented." She gave a final nod. Then, with a soft crackle from the speakers, Diddy's voice filled the room. The courtroom had briefly settled, relaxed in the quiet, before everything changed. The recording began like a casual chat. You could hear the clinking of ice in glasses, soft music in the background, and 2 men talking comfortably. One of them, unmistakably Diddy, was laughing, his tone light, easy. It sounded like 2 friends catching up after an industry event. There was nothing alarming, not yet. But about 3 minutes in, the mood shifted. The other man asked, "What about the girl from the party? That situation taken care of?" There was a pause. The sound of a drink being poured. Then Diddy's voice returned, less relaxed, more cautious, but still confident. "It's always taken care of. That's why I have a system. That's why I pay people what I do." The man pushed a little, sounding concerned, but she said something about going public. Diddy didn't flinch. His reply was cold. "Talking is one thing. Doing is another. They all talk at first, then they remember how this town works. Who gives them work? Who makes their careers? Who can end them?" And And just like that, the real weight of the conversation began to emerge. Diddy started talking more openly. He described what he called his infrastructure, a carefully built network of staff, friends, and industry connections, all designed to make problems disappear. "You've been to the parties," he said. "Phones get checked at the door, NDAs before they even get in the car. The right atmosphere, the right substances. It's not luck, it's structure." The tone on the other end of the conversation grew uneasy. Some of these girls, they look wrecked afterward. That one model ended up in the hospital. Diddy didn't hesitate. And who paid that hospital bill? Who made sure the cops didn't get called? Who got her a campaign with that French label 3 months later? She's fine. They're all fine. They get something. I get something. The ones who get it, they rise. The rest, they don't. Inside the courtroom, jurors listened intently, some horrified, some scribbling furious notes. One older woman appeared visibly shaken, holding back tears. Diddy sat stone still, eyes locked on the table in front of him. His lawyer, hand on his shoulder, offered silent reassurance, or maybe restraint. The recording moved into more personal territory, aligning almost word for word with testimony already shared by several accusers. Only this time it was coming from Diddy himself. To him, these weren't victims. These were people in a mutually beneficial deal. "The issue is, they forget," Diddy said. "They forget who gave them a shot. I put them in rooms they could never reach on their own. Got them seen. Got them paid. And now they act like they did it by themselves." The other man challenged him. "But some of it crosses the line. That girl, she didn't agree to that." Diddy cut him off. "She agreed the second she took that first gift. The first invite, that's the contract. Everything else, just details." The audio grew darker. Diddy began speaking openly about controlling narratives, how silence was secured, how evidence disappeared, how reputations were destroyed before a word could be spoken. He named names, names already brought up in court, and confirmed stories. The prosecution had pieced together. Only this time, it wasn't speculation. It was straight from Diddy. The most damning moment came around the 15-minute mark. "Consent," Diddy said flatly, "is a contract. You give me something. I give you something. The only problem, people want to change the deal after they've already cashed in. That's not how it works." The other man, clearly disturbed now, pushed back. "But they say they were drugged, that they couldn't even give consent." A pause. The sound of a glass being slammed down. Then Diddy's voice, lower, harder. "And who's going to believe them? Them or me? Them against a system I built. I've spent decades making sure I'm protected, that this doesn't happen." In the courtroom, one prosecutor closed her eyes, just for a second, as if hearing everything laid out so plainly made it all the more unbearable. Diddy's lawyer was writing non-stop, whispering to the team beside him, clearly scrambling to control the fallout. Judge Tarnowski, meanwhile, watched the jury, tracking every reaction, every stunned expression. The recording continued, revealing how allegations were contained, how witnesses were managed, how digital trails vanished before they could become evidence. Diddy had answers for everything, systems for everything, and as the final seconds of the recording played, the courtroom sat frozen, hearing not just the words, but the weight behind them. As the recording neared its final moments, the tone shifted once more. Diddy's voice, previously calm and confident, now carried an unmistakable sense of finality. "It doesn't matter what did or didn't happen," he said. "What matters is, there's no proof, no credible witness. I don't let it come down to their word against mine, because I've already won that game before it even starts." The room was silent, still hanging on every word. Then came one last question from the other man on the tape. But with all this Me Too stuff, aren't you worried? People are actually listening to accusations now. Diddy let out a laugh. Cold, echoing. It rang through the courtroom like an alarm that couldn't be silenced. That's for people without real power, he replied. I've got senators in my contacts, police chiefs at my parties. I've spent 30 years building this. I'm not worried about a hashtag on Twitter. The final sound on the recording, glasses clinking together in a toast. Then his voice clear and unapologetic. To being untouchable. The recording stopped, and for a moment, the courtroom felt frozen in time. No one moved, no one breathed. It was as if the very air had been sucked out of the room. Judge Tarnowski broke the silence at last. Let the record show that Exhibit 24B has been played in full for the jury. She turned to the defense table. Does the defense wish to respond? Diddy's lead attorney rose slowly, visibly rattled despite his practiced courtroom demeanor. Yes, Your Honor. We request a brief recess to confer with our client. The judge nodded. The court is in recess for 30 minutes. She turned to the jury. Do not discuss this recording or any other part of the trial during the break. As the jurors filed out, many avoided even glancing in Diddy's direction. The gallery erupted in a wave of whispers the second the judge stepped off the bench. And for the first time since the trial began, Diddy looked afraid. When court resumed after the break, the atmosphere had changed. Tension lingered in the air like smoke. Diddy had tried to pull himself together, but the old confidence was gone. His lawyers surrounded him, whispering, passing notes, visibly in damage control mode. Across the room, the prosecution sat quietly, almost solemnly. Their case had just shifted into a new gear, one they likely hadn't dared hope for. Judge Tarnowski returned and addressed the room. Before we move forward, I want to clarify the background of the evidence the jury just heard. She explained that the recording had come from a confidential informant, someone present during the conversation. It had been made legally under California's one-party consent law. Every legal challenge from the defense had been reviewed and dismissed. The recording has been verified by expert analysts. Its value as direct evidence outweighs any potential bias, she said. Given its relevance to the charges of racketeering and sex trafficking, the court finds it fully admissible. She turned to the prosecution. You may proceed. Assistant U.S. Attorney Emily Johnson stood. Her voice was calm. Your Honor, the government calls Special Agent Marcus Rivera of the FBI. A tall man in his late 40s with sharp features and a professional air stepped forward. After being sworn in, the prosecutor wasted no time. Agent Rivera, were you part of the investigation that led to the recording we just heard? Yes, Rivera replied. I've been lead case agent on the investigation into Mr. Combs since early 2020. Can you explain how the FBI obtained this recording? Rivera nodded. In December 2019, an individual came to us with information about Mr. Combs' alleged criminal conduct. They had been part of his inner circle for years. After we vetted them, they agreed to work with us as a confidential informant. Were they the one who made the recording? Yes, they recorded it months earlier, originally as a form of protection, in case they were ever targeted for questioning his behavior. Johnson stepped toward the witness with a document in hand. Your Honor, we'd like to enter this FBI memorandum as Exhibit 25. After it was formally accepted, she continued. Agent Rivera, this document details the informant's initial interview. What were the main concerns they brought forward? Rivera responded without hesitation. They described what they called a coordinated operation led by Mr. Combs. The system focused on identifying, grooming, and exploiting young women, especially those trying to break into the entertainment industry. It used drugs, intimidation, and financial pressure to keep control. The courtroom listened in stunned silence. What had been hinted at in whispers now confirmed under oath. The courtroom. Screens lit up with a chart. At the top, one name, Sean Diddy Combs. Special Agent Marcus Rivera stood beside the display, pointing to the complex web branching out beneath it, lines connecting names, roles, and responsibilities. A criminal enterprise, he explained, with Mr. Combs at the center. This wasn't random, it was structured, Rivera said. At the top, Mr. Combs issued instructions. Below him, trusted lieutenants managed operations, everything from party logistics to legal cleanups. They protected him by creating distance from the most explicit criminal acts. He outlined layer after layer, security personnel who kept victims in or outsiders out, doctors who discreetly supplied prescription drugs, fixers who made problems disappear using payoffs, intimidation, or worse, lawyers who crafted airtight NDAs and settlements to ensure silence, and finally, at the bottom, the alleged victims, women brought into the orbit, then controlled by what the government now called a system of exploitation. What made this operation so difficult to penetrate, Rivera noted, was its compartmentalization. Each person only knew their role, rarely the full picture. That's a hallmark of organized criminal activity. The only person with full visibility? Mr. Combs. As he testified, Rivera confirmed details from the now infamous recording, linking Diddy's own words to evidence investigators had collected over years. Bank transfers to women who later withdrew abuse allegations. Text messages, instructing security to keep certain individuals from leaving parties. Medical records of women hospitalized after Combs hosted events, all of it aligned. And then came the most chilling moment of the day. Rivera turned to a victim's statement from earlier in the trial. She had testified that when she resisted a sexual act at a 2018 party, she was told, "Consent is a contract." The defense had called that phrasing suspicious, too specific, too rehearsed. But now, the jury had heard it, verbatim on the tape, in Diddy's own voice. Gasps rippled through the gallery. At the defense table, Diddy whispered something, sharply to his attorneys, who leaned in, clearly alarmed by his agitation. He was no longer the composed figure he'd been at the start of the trial. And then, it happened. He stood. "This is all lies," Diddy shouted, his voice rising above the judge's gavel. "That recording's out of context." Chaos. A stir in the gallery. Reporters typing furiously, security closing in. Judge Tarnowski's voice cut through it all. "Mr. Combs, sit down immediately. You are not permitted to speak unless through your attorney or from the witness stand." Diddy froze, then slowly lowered himself back into his seat as his lead counsel placed a calming hand on his arm. "Sean, please. This isn't helping." The outburst left a silence heavier than before. The judge turned to the jury. "You are instructed to disregard the defendant's outburst. It is not evidence." But it was too late. The jurors had seen it, and their expressions made it clear it had registered deeply. Some looked at Combs directly for the first time in days. What they saw now wasn't just a man on trial, but a man unraveling. With the courtroom restored to order, the prosecution continued, methodically building their case piece by piece. By the time Rivera stepped down from the stand, the defense's narrative, that this was all about money, lies, and fame, was crumbling. Diddy's own words, played in his own voice, had confirmed what the government had long argued. This wasn't about misunderstandings or bad nights. It was about a system, a machine built to exploit, to silence, to protect itself, at all costs. Next, the prosecution called Dr. Eliza Montgomery, a distinguished trauma psychologist in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and steady, compassionate eyes. Dr. Montgomery approached the stand with quiet authority. She had spent decades studying patterns of coercive control, how powerful individuals manipulate, isolate, and condition their victims into silence. As she raised her hand and took the oath, the courtroom braced for a different kind of testimony, one not based on evidence or money trails, but on the emotional and psychological wreckage left behind by abuse. And for the first time in this trial, the jury would hear not just what happened, but what it did to the people who lived through it. "This isn't opportunism," Dr. Montgomery said. "This is strategy, a deliberate and layered system that makes victims feel unable to say no and unsafe if they try." The prosecutor leaned in. "Dr. Montgomery, earlier you referenced Mr. Combs's phrase, 'consent is a contract.' Can you speak to the significance of that?" "Yes," she replied. When someone frames consent as a contract, especially in an imbalanced power dynamic, they're not describing healthy interaction. They're describing an exchange under pressure. In Mr. Combs' case, he wasn't talking about mutual agreement. He was talking about power, about ownership. She paused, then added, "Statements like 'I made them' or 'I can break them' reflect a core feature of coercive control, creating dependency, then exploiting it." As jurors took notes, the prosecution displayed text messages previously entered into evidence, messages from women who had testified, messages where they tried, gently, nervously, to back out of plans, to express discomfort. At first, the responses were kind, warm. "You're special to me." Then colder. "After everything I've done for you, this is how you act." And finally, threats. "Don't forget who got you that contract. You know who controls that call sheet." Dr. Montgomery studied the screen before speaking. "What we see here is a pattern called intermittent reinforcement, alternating between praise and punishment to keep someone psychologically off balance. It's a tactic that makes people doubt their instincts and work harder for approval, even in harmful environments." The room stayed silent. Then came the question everyone knew was coming. "Dr. Montgomery, the recording mentioned substances, alcohol, drugs. What role do those play in this type of system?" Her response was measured, but direct. "The use of drugs and alcohol, especially without informed consent, is a known method of exploitation. It reduces resistance. It clouds memory. It creates ambiguity and shame, both of which silence victims, and it allows perpetrators to maintain plausible deniability." She looked directly at the jury. When Mr. Combs spoke about using the right substances to make people more flexible, he wasn't joking. He was describing a method, a tactic designed to compromise consent, which by definition requires clarity and freedom of choice, not coercion and certainly not intoxication. As her testimony continued, Dr. Montgomery began connecting individual stories, incidents that once seemed isolated, and reframed them as evidence of a single cohesive pattern, a structure of control, a machine built to trap. Her clinical explanations gave language to the trauma jurors had already heard about from witnesses, the fear, the confusion, the silence. "Why didn't they speak up sooner?" had been an unspoken question. Now, it had an answer. When a powerful person tells you, out loud, no one will believe you, they are telling the truth of the system they've built. A system that has proven, time and again, it will protect them, not the people they hurt. The prosecutor nodded and walked slowly back to the lectern. "Dr. Montgomery, in your opinion, why do victims often wait years, sometimes decades, before coming forward in cases like this?" Dr. Montgomery exhaled, her voice softening. "Because they've been conditioned to believe that resistance brings punishment. That disclosure brings destruction. And because they've seen others try and fail. The fear isn't imagined. It's been proven to them, over and over again." She paused. "And when Mr. Combs said, 'It's their word against mine, and I've already won that game,' he wasn't just speaking hypothetically. He was naming the very reasons so many victims stay silent. At the defense table, Diddy sat perfectly still, not defiant, not confident, just still. The energy from his earlier outburst was gone, extinguished or buried. His attorneys scribbled notes, but when cross-examination began, it was clear they were treading carefully. Their questions were broad, cautious, trying to cast doubt on the limits of psychological science or the ambiguity of memory. But Dr. Montgomery stayed grounded. "Yes," she said, "memory can be imperfect. Power dynamics can exist in consensual relationships." Then, she returned to the words on the recording. "But when someone explicitly states that silence is bought, that leverage is used, that consent is conditional, and control is the goal, that is not ambiguity. That is strategy. That is abuse." The cross-examination ended quietly. No fireworks. No reversals. And as Dr. Montgomery stepped down, the jury seemed changed. Not convinced necessarily, but awakened. As if they'd been given a new lens to see everything that had come before. The case wasn't over, but something had shifted. They no longer had to imagine how such things could happen. They had just been shown exactly how they do. Narrator, V.O. By the time Dr. Eliza Montgomery stepped down from the stand, something had changed. You could feel it in the room. The clinical framework she provided didn't just explain what the jury had heard on that devastating recording, it redefined it. Suddenly, what the defense had tried to paint as misunderstandings, poor judgment, or transactional relationships, was seen for what it was: a system. A system designed to manipulate consent. A system designed to silence. A system designed to protect the man at the top. Cut to Courtroom Gallery. Several women who had already testified held hands. Some wiped away silent tears. One woman closed her eyes as if letting out a breath she'd been holding for years. Journalists scribbled furiously. Laptops clicked. The phrase, "architecture of silence," began trending before court was even adjourned. Judge Tarnowski, on camera from the bench. "In light of today's evidence, we will reconvene tomorrow morning to discuss potential adjustments to the trial schedule and any motions either side may wish to file." She turned to the jury, her voice steady but firm. "You are again instructed not to discuss this case with anyone, including each other, and to avoid all media coverage. You are excused for the day." Narrator, V.O. As the courtroom emptied, the impact of the day still hung heavy. There was no more space for ambiguity or doubt. The prosecution's narrative, that this wasn't a series of isolated events, but a deliberate, long-standing system of abuse, had finally found undeniable proof. In Diddy's own voice, and Diddy himself. He didn't meet anyone's eyes as he left the courtroom. The man once known for his swagger and stage presence now walked with his head down, surrounded by lawyers, as if the walls of the courthouse had finally begun to close in. The next morning, outside the courthouse, chaos. Protesters and supporters, placards, shouting, cameras. The headlines had shifted. The tape that changed everything. Diddy's empire built on silence. Consent, control, and the culture of fear. Inside, the mood was tense. Security had been tightened. Reporters packed the press box. Legal experts filled morning talk shows speculating that a plea deal could now be imminent. Narrator, V.O. At 9:01 a.m., the prosecution entered the courtroom. Calm, focused. The defense table, still empty. Until 9:06, when Diddy walked in, not alone, now flanked by two new high-profile attorneys flown in overnight for what was clearly damage control. Judge Tarnowski called the room to order. Judge Tarnowski. I understand the defense wishes to make a statement before we proceed. Diddy's lead attorney rose. Yes, Your Honor. After extensive consultation with our client, we would like to request a brief recess to explore a potential resolution with the prosecution. A murmur swept through the courtroom. Judge Tarnowski, calm, skeptical. Are you indicating that Mr. Combs wishes to change his plea? Defense. We're requesting time to discuss options, Your Honor. Judge Tarnowski turned to the prosecution. Prosecutor. We are open to discussions, Your Honor. However, given the stage of trial and the strength of our case, any resolution must reflect the seriousness of the charges. Judge Tarnowski nodded. I'll grant a 2-hour recess. Court will reconvene at 11:30. As the jury was excused, reporters bolted for the doors. The whispers turned into breaking news alerts. Diddy in plea talks. Potential deal. In the works. Narrator, V.O. But it wasn't that simple. When court reconvened at 11:30, the tension was palpable. Judge Tarnowski. Have the parties reached an agreement? Prosecutor. No, Your Honor. We made an offer. The defense has declined. Defense. That's correct, Your Honor. We're prepared to continue with trial. Judge Tarnowski. Very well. Bring in the jury. The jury returned, clearly sensing something had happened behind closed doors, but no one said a word. Then, the prosecution called its next witness, Melissa Chen, former personal assistant. Employed by Combs from 2012 to 2017, calm, measured, no theatrics. Prosecutor. Ms. Chen, have you had an opportunity to listen to the recording that was played in court yesterday? Chen. Yes. The FBI played it for me about 6 months ago. Narrator, V.O. What she said next would add yet another layer to the government's case. A look from the inside. Not from a victim, but from someone who helped keep the machine running. Knowingly or not. Melissa Chen had waited 7 years to speak, and now, under oath, with Diddy just feet away, she made every word count. Prosecutor. Ms. Chen, what was your reaction to hearing that recording yesterday? Chen. Relief. She paused, visibly steady, but her voice was tight. Relief that someone had finally captured it, because so many of us were told for years that no one would believe us without proof. Prosecutor, can you elaborate? What do you mean by those conversations? Chen, Mr. Combs was very open with his inner circle about how he operated. The language in that recording about consent being a contract, about having a system, about making and breaking people, I heard versions of those phrases dozens of times while I worked for him. The screen behind her lit up with emails. Exhibit 26, internal communications between Chen and other staff. Prosecutor, can you identify these emails? Chen, nodding. Yes, these were about special events, parties held at his residences. In L.A., Miami, New York. Prosecutor, and your role? Chen. Logistics, guest lists, transportation, NDA enforcement. I also collected phones and recording devices before guests entered. Then the prosecutor highlighted a phrase in one email, the usual supplies. Prosecutor, can you explain what that meant? Chen's expression tightened. Chen, that referred to drugs, primarily MDMA, ketamine and GHB. There were also documentation supplies that meant cameras and audio equipment set up in certain rooms. Prosecutor, why was that equipment used? Chen, Mr. Combs called it insurance. He believed everyone should have something on everyone else. That's how he maintained control. As the testimony continued, the pattern became unmistakable. What had once seemed like isolated choices, exclusive parties, luxury perks, non-disclosure agreements were in fact pieces of a structure, an ecosystem of control meticulously designed to create leverage. Chen, we were all compartmentalized. Different teams handled different parts. Most of us never saw the whole picture. Then she said the words that cut through the courtroom, like a blade. We were all implicated in some way. Everyone had done something they could be blamed for if it all fell apart. Everyone had something to lose. Prosecutor: So what made you come forward? For the first time, Melissa Chen turned to look directly at Sean Combs. Chen: I stayed quiet after I left. I was scared. I had signed multiple NDAs, but when I saw the video of him assaulting his girlfriend in that hotel hallway... She swallowed hard. Something broke. That could have been any of us. That could have been me. She reached out to an attorney, contacted the FBI, brought what little she had. I didn't know if they'd believe me, she said, but I couldn't stay silent anymore. She then corroborated testimony from previous witnesses, describing young women lured in with career promises, separated from friends, offered drinks or pills they didn't understand. Chen: There was a pattern. They'd be introduced to Mr. Combs, encouraged to relax, to take something. Then they'd disappear into a private room. Afterward, they looked changed, confused, frightened. And then the gifts would come, the opportunities, the contract. Narrator: V.O. At the defense table, Diddy's posture had collapsed. Gone was the confident defiance from earlier in the trial. Now he sat hunched, vacant, unresponsive. His attorneys whispered to him repeatedly, but he didn't look up. Cross-examination was tense. The defense painted Chen as a disgruntled ex-employee. She acknowledged being fired in 2017, but denied any financial motive. Chen: My career ended the day I came forward. I've been blacklisted, harassed. But I couldn't live with myself if I stayed quiet while other women kept getting hurt. She stepped down from the witness stand. And in that moment, the narrative wasn't just consistent. It was irrefutable. The jury could see it. They weren't just hearing stories anymore. They were watching a machine being dismantled. Next, witness: Dr. James Wilson, toxicologist, clinical, unemotional, but his testimony hit like a hammer. Dr. Wilson: We analyzed blood samples from multiple women tested within 24 hours of events held at Mr. Combs' properties. In every case, we found combinations of GHB, ketamine, and MDMA. He explained the effects: memory gaps, confusion, increased compliance, a state of consciousness that mimics sobriety, while the brain is impaired. Dr. Wilson: These drugs, particularly in combination, can make a person appear alert and responsive, but remove the capacity for meaningful consent. He paused. Moreover, they cause anterograde amnesia, the inability to form new memories after ingestion. Jurors shifted in their seats. Dr. Wilson concluded bluntly, These substances weren't recreational in this context. They were used deliberately, in a way that made consent impossible and made memory unreliable. Narrator: V.O. By the end of the day, the courtroom didn't feel like a courtroom anymore. It felt like a reckoning, no longer a question of if a system existed, but how many people had helped build it, and how long it had been allowed to thrive. Amnesia can block new memories from forming, leaving victims with only bits and pieces of what really happened. The prosecutor tied this idea directly to a recording where Diddy talked about using the right substances to make people more pliable. Dr. Wilson confirmed that the drugs found in the victim systems would indeed cause the kind of impaired consent Diddy had described. The judge called for a short break. As the courtroom began to empty, Diddy stayed seated, staring straight ahead. You could see the weight of his own testimony pressing down on him. The man who once claimed to be untouchable had just handed over the last piece of the puzzle, his own words sealing his fate. When Sean "Diddy" Combs stepped down from the stand, he didn't look victorious. He looked like a man facing the truth of his actions for the first time. The courtroom was stunned, silently absorbing the shock of what had just happened. Even the judge seemed taken aback by the unintentional confession. Some jurors wiped away tears. But outside the courtroom, the world was only starting to catch up. The music industry went into crisis mode. Record labels rushed out statements, distancing themselves and promising to review their harassment policies. Artists who'd worked with Diddy for years scrambled to express shock and condemn his behavior. Former associates who once thrived under his influence now said they'd always suspected something was wrong behind closed doors. Crisis meetings erupted at entertainment companies in Los Angeles and New York. PR firms sent out guides on how to handle questions about working with Diddy. And while many acted surprised, the internet was busy connecting dots that had been there for years. Old interviews resurfaced, where insiders made jokes about his parties. Photos circulated showing uncomfortable women at those events, now seen in a new, troubling light. Most painful of all, past accusations once dismissed as extortion were now taken seriously. Fans weren't just shocked, they were furious. Furious that someone they admired had abused his power so blatantly. Furious that the industry had protected him for decades, and furious that it took so long for the victims to be heard. The era of silence and protection was finally over. The next morning, the courtroom felt different. News outlets reported that Diddy's defense team was thinking about changing his plea. Legal experts said the recording made winning the case nearly impossible. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity, with people lined up outside just to get a seat. When Judge Tarnowski took her place, she addressed an urgent matter. "I understand the defense has a motion to present before we continue," she said. Diddy's lead attorney stood up. "Yes, Your Honor. After speaking with Mr. Combs, we request permission for him to address the court directly." The prosecutor objected right away. "Your Honor, if the defendant wants to speak, he must take the witness stand and be cross-examined. This looks like an attempt to talk to the jury without questioning." The judge paused, weighing the request. "What is the purpose of Mr. Combs' statement? My client wants to respond to the recording played in court and give context he believes is missing," the attorney said. The judge looked at Diddy. "Mr. Combs, are you ready to testify and face cross-examination on this and all other related matters?" A heavy silence filled the room. After a brief talk with his lawyers, Diddy stood. "Yes, Your Honor, I will take the stand." The courtroom buzzed with shock. Until now, no one expected Diddy to testify. It's rare for defendants to risk testifying because it can open them up to more trouble. His choice felt like either a last-ditch effort or an admission that the case was lost. Once sworn in, Diddy looked very different. Gone was the flashy suit and confident air. Instead, he wore a simple navy suit, sat with a humbled posture, and spoke quietly. His attorney started with a straightforward question. "Mr. Combs, we all heard the recording played in court. What context do you think is missing?" Diddy cleared his throat. "First, I want to say my words on that recording are unforgivable. There's no way to make them okay. I was arrogant, cold, and wrong." The courtroom stirred at this honest admission. His attorney seemed caught off guard but pressed on. "Can you explain to the jury what state of mind you were in during that conversation?" "I was intoxicated," Diddy said. "Not just from alcohol or drugs, but from power. I spent decades surrounded by people who catered to my every whim, who told me I was untouchable, who cleaned up my messes. I began to believe I was above the rules everyone else has. Diddy's attorney gently led him through questions about his journey, his rise from humble beginnings, building a music empire, and the drive that pushed him forward. Diddy spoke about growing up without a father and his ambition to succeed. But instead of using his success as a defense, he kept coming back to one truth: how that success had changed him for the worse. "I confused power with the right to use that power over others," he said. "I told myself everyone benefited from their connection to me, that it was a fair deal. but I refused to see the damage I was causing. When pressed on the serious charges, sex trafficking and racketeering, Diddy's answers were careful, but still damning. I created an environment where boundaries were blurred, where consent was often ignored, where silence was bought, he admitted. I didn't call it trafficking or racketeering. I called it business, parties, networking. But those words don't change what it really was. His lawyer seemed to be navigating new ground, with Diddy straying from the usual defense playbook. When asked about victims who had testified, Diddy didn't deny their stories. I don't dispute what they said, he said quietly. For years, I told myself their memories were wrong. That recording showed how I justified my behavior. I convinced myself power and opportunity made it okay to ask for those things. As the questioning continued, it became clear. Diddy wasn't trying to mount a typical defense. Instead, he was offering something closer to a confession, wrapped in his past and personal struggles. Whether this was a smart legal move to lessen his sentence or a real moment of facing the truth, no one could say for sure. The real test came when the prosecutor began cross-examination. With a heavy binder of evidence, the lead prosecutor approached the stand. "Mr. Combs, you've said you've had a revelation about your past actions. Is that right?" "Yes," Diddy replied. "When did this revelation happen? Was it yesterday, after the jury heard your own words describing a system of control and exploitation? After your former employees confirmed what you said?" "It's been a process," Diddy answered, his voice cracking a bit. "But yes, hearing that recording in court was a wake-up call. Hearing myself say those things, seeing how the jury, the public, even my family reacted, I couldn't hide anymore." The prosecutor nodded sharply. "So it wasn't during the years you did these things, not when victims sued or when you were arrested. It was only yesterday when the jury heard undeniable proof of your guilt?" "Objection, Your Honor." "Argumentative," Diddy's lawyer interrupted. "Sustained," the judge said. "Please." "Rephrase." The prosecutor adjusted but pressed on, walking Diddy through the victims' stories one by one. Diddy mostly confirmed their accounts, sometimes saying his memory was foggy because of his substance use back then. One of the most powerful moments came when the prosecutor asked about a line from the recording, "Who's going to believe them? Their word against mine." "Is that right?" the prosecutor asked. "Yes," Diddy admitted. "And that idea that no one would believe your victims because of your wealth and influence was at the core of how you operated for years." Diddy paused, then nodded slowly. "Yes. So all those women who spoke up, dismissed as gold diggers or liars, you knew they were telling the truth?" "Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is testifying," the lawyer said. "I'll rephrase," the prosecutor said before the judge could rule. "Mr. Combs, when previous victims came forward with similar stories, did you know they were telling the truth?" Diddy looked down at his hands but didn't answer right away. "And did you take part in efforts to discredit them, to paint them as liars seeking money?" "Yes." "Did you authorize payments to silence them?" "Yes." "Did you threaten their careers if they refused to accept those payments and sign non-disclosure agreements?" "Yes." As cross-examination went on, Diddy's calm began to fade. The prosecutor carefully went through every charge, pulling out admissions that matched the legal definitions of sex trafficking, racketeering, and the other crimes he faced. By the end, Diddy looked drained, worn down by the process. Instead of softening the impact of that recording, his testimony had only made the prosecution's case stronger. When he finally stepped down from the witness stand, he paused, looking out at the courtroom filled with reporters, victims, curious onlookers, and his own family. For a moment it seemed he might say more, but then, without a word, he walked back to the defense table. For the first time since his arrest, Diddy looked like a man who'd accepted what was coming. He didn't speak with his attorneys, didn't take notes, didn't whisper strategies. He just sat quietly, the weight of everything pressing down on him. He sat still, eyes locked on the empty witness stand he had just left, as if he could still see the ghost of who he once was. The man who believed he was untouchable now faced the weight of his own truth. Later, when reporters asked his lead attorney if Diddy's testimony was a calculated move, the lawyer simply said, "Sometimes the truth is the only strategy left." The next day in court, the defense made a stunning announcement. Diddy wanted to change his plea to guilty on all counts. After consulting with the victims, the prosecution agreed, but made it clear they would push for the harshest penalties allowed. Judge Tarnowski spoke directly to Diddy, making sure he fully understood the rights he was giving up and the serious consequences ahead. When asked if anyone had pressured him to change his plea, Diddy shook his head. "No, Your Honor, I'm pleading guilty because I am guilty. I've caused a lot of pain to many people over many years. I can't undo that, but I can own it and accept what comes next." Sentencing was set for 6 weeks later. As Diddy was led away in handcuffs, several of the victims who had bravely testified watched quietly, some holding hands, others wiping away tears. The man who once seemed untouchable was finally facing justice. In the weeks that followed, the fallout spread far beyond Diddy. Multiple investigations launched into the industry practices that let this happen. Other powerful figures came under renewed scrutiny, and victims from across entertainment began stepping forward, inspired by this case to share their own stories. That 9-minute recording, the one that broke everything open, became the centerpiece of documentaries, podcasts, and studies about power, abuse, and accountability in the music world. At the sentencing hearing, victims spoke with raw honesty. One woman, who met Diddy as a hopeful 19-year-old singer, addressed him directly. "You stole my dreams, my confidence, and years of my life. But today, seeing you face consequences that your fame and money couldn't stop, that gives me back something you took. It gives me hope that things can change." Diddy was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison for the most serious charges, with other sentences to run alongside. As the judge spoke, she made it clear. The harm you caused was not accidental or isolated. By your own words, it was systematic, deliberate, and lasted decades. This sentence reflects not just the crimes themselves, but the deep, lasting damage you inflicted. As he was led out of the courtroom for the last time, Diddy no longer looked like the music mogul who once graced magazine covers and ruled the industry. He looked like what the court had declared him, a criminal who abused his power for years and was finally held accountable. Outside the courthouse, one of the lead prosecutors made a brief statement. "Today's outcome sends a message that should have been clear from the start. No one is above the law. No amount of money, fame, or power puts you beyond accountability, and no victim's voice is too small to be heard." The case sparked real change. California and New York passed laws limiting how non-disclosure agreements can be used in sexual misconduct cases. The recording industry created new oversight and support systems for young artists. Victim advocacy groups saw record numbers reaching out, especially from entertainment and other industries where powerful gatekeepers rule. But maybe the biggest impact was simpler. It proved that decades of silence can be broken. All it takes is the truth, captured in 9 minutes of unguarded conversation, where a powerful man finally showed who he really was. If you found this story meaningful, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We're dedicated to sharing important stories that might otherwise be missed. Your support helps us keep doing this work. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching.